So our final speaker is Dr. Kevin Silverstein from the University of Minnesota, and his talk will be on digital agriculture platforms, spurring public-private collaboration and data-driven innovation.
Oh, thanks, Aaron. Oh, I just did the wrong one. Let's see, try that again. There we go. All right. First, before I begin, thanks actually to the conference organizers for including me. It's a great opportunity to talk to you about some of the comparisons we're doing of our platform and other platforms. But first, I wanted to actually bring your attention to an upcoming meeting that actually several of us at this conference are co-organizing. That's taking place in September 24th through 25th. It's also very related to the topics of agriculture and the data revolution. We'll paste in, one of us will paste in the URL, but it's z.umn.edu/agdata2020 to find out more information and to register for that conference. So now back to the topic of today, and I will go ahead and present. Let me just briefly say a little bit about myself and my co-authors. So I'm Kevin Silverstein. I'm at the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute, where I am a scientific lead. I'm also operations manager of GEMS, an agroinformatics platform that will be one of the platforms we'll be discussing today. Also, additionally, we've got Jim Wilgenbush and Phil Pardey are both co-organizers of this particular meeting, both at the University of Minnesota. Jim leads research computing. Phil is he's actually leading for the College of Food and Agriculture and Natural Resource Sciences, a lot of the global ag research and policy. And Brian Runk and Ali Joglekar also working with GEMS. So let's go ahead and give a little bit of background. So I think that there are a lot of drivers actually of agricultural productivity throughout the various centuries, and they've kind of followed a progression. First, if you think back to Jethro Tull around 1701, inventing the seed drill, and additionally John Deere with the steel plow, maybe 140 years later, he had a lot of mechanical engineering innovations that were driving ag productivity. You can see almost on this slope of cereal yields in the United Kingdom, picking up after those points. Later, of course, in the 1950s, 1940s, you had chemical innovations for pesticides and various other things, and then biological pesticides came considerably later. And now we're actually kind of at a new turning point, I think, where we have a lot of digital innovations kind of converging. And although I'd say in this particular plot, yields are kind of leveling off, kind of teetering at just that moment of inspiration, I think that there's a few things that need to come together for a lot of our digital data and innovations to actually really come together and drive ag productivity. And a lot of those potentially could be in the way that we exchange data and the way that we share and mobilize data so that we can all actually collectively use them. And there are some challenges, which we'll address in the slides to come with that. And we've actually talked about throughout this conference, issues of privacy and getting access to data and making sure it's fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, and even fair and secure, as we heard from Deborah earlier, or fairer, as we say, adding the E and the R, ethical, and not just reusable, but actually reproducible. These are actually important concepts. So it becomes very important how we actually collect that data, we analyze that data, clean that data, interoperate that data. So when we think of a platform, it's interesting how many different platforms are starting to proliferate out there. And even the term itself, platform, has been used very broadly. So you can think on the one end, something like the Ag Data Commons that Cindy Parr and Associates have developed, which is a fantastic data repository, meant to be precisely that, a place where you can deposit data and others can find it. To something all the way at the other end, say an analytical engine, to where, bring your data or find your data however you want, but it's a place to actually do computations on your data. Something maybe slightly related to that could be like a website with a few tools on it. some people have just strict relational database that you could access, or something as a hybrid, which I would say the GEMS platform is more like, which is has data repository capability, but has a lot of analytics and data cleaning tools and things of that sort attached to it. Just as complicated of this field is that they exist in a wide range of accessibility models. On the one hand, on the right here, you have some platforms, again, like the Ag Data Commons, which is completely open, built on open data principles. And on the exact opposite end, you might have something that's completely proprietary, where you have to actually either have explicit access to everything that's of all of its contents. And again, our platform is somewhere in between, which I'll hint upon or I'll describe in coming slides. So we sought to think about each of different components and thought, well, how can we look at a bunch of different data platforms that are out there and start figuring out where do they reside on various objective measures. And so we kind of enumerated several things. Let's start with privacy on the left here. Maybe at the very basic level for privacy, you could have data being completely open. You could also actually, on top of that, say number one, for example, talks about allowing embargoes in your data. So for example, again, the Ag Data Commons is a great example where they actually allow users to submit data, and it could be waiting up until a certain date before it's actually submitted more broadly to the community. And that's an important attribute, beyond completely openness. It's very open after a certain, when its time comes. There's also this concept that sometimes it would be worthwhile to actually allow your data to be the actual fact that your data exists and information about your data, but not actually reveal the data. Guardian is a great repository that actually has that principle, where they actually include data sets that are restricted, but at least they tell you, where is it done, who were the authors, what were the subjects, and things of that sort, which is a nice feature. Item number 3 I have in privacy is selective sharing. Some platforms, as I said, are completely free. Others allow you to choose precisely who are the individuals or the groups that you allow it to be distributed. Now, any proprietor or company data is going to be exempt from the Freedom of Information Act, but a lot of things in public institutions are not, unless you have an explicit statute like we have for the GEMS database that allows us to be free from FOIA. And anonymizing tools are actually incredibly important. As you heard Sunny talk about the tools that we have to fuzz data or to jitter or chain or de-identify data in various ways. Those are important aspects of privacy. So moving on to security, and I will go through these a little bit faster to make sure I have enough time to actually talk about the things. There's various different levels of security, from minimally protected to making sure you have remote backups off-site. The fact that you have an alarmed no access data center. These are actually just operational things that are needed to be done, but also separate file systems so people can't snoop in on data. Encryption, of course, in flight as well as at rest, we've heard earlier today. And actually having security training, because you can have all the things in place in the world, and if folks don't do the right thing, you can still be open to all sorts of dangers as far as security of your data. And finally, interoperability of your data. Platforms could be built on open source software, which is great, using regularized vocabularies and internationally accepted ontologies, international metadata standards as well, making sure you version files, link them, and perform data cleaning so that the data that is not just dumped data, but actually cleaned to be interoperable with other data sets. So very important things. Here's just a very quick, and this will be expanded in our paper to be submitted to the Agronomy Journal, as well as verifying a few of these things that some at the moment we just don't have available yet because we couldn't figure out from the product literature or things of that sort. Those are different ratings that I just mentioned, from privacy, interoperability, security, and interoperability. we wanted to say, what is the focus of this data set? So we looked at various data sets that are deposited, both data sets as well as tools, and to what degree do they focus in on spatial, temporal data? And if at least 5% of the data that was in there is focused on different spatial aspects or temporal aspects, then we put a Y, otherwise put an N. Likewise for G, E, M, and S, genetics, environment management, and socioeconomic. That is a similar thing there. I think just take homes to come away with is, you know, it's very interesting how different the different sources, if you actually go to Cyverse and look at their data, very strong focus on genetics. Likewise, Descartes is very, very focused on spatial temporal data and environmental data sets. So a lot of different focus. Grow Intelligence is pretty much everything but genetics. So, you know, lots of interesting things to do in comparing these different repositories. And that's just basically where their focus has been. So just to kind of summarize a lot of the information that I just put in here, that ag platforms exist for a variety of purposes. There's lots of them out there. They could be anywhere from just places where you just deposit data to places where you do data analytics and also in between. When it comes to the openness policy, there is, again, from open, completely open to completely proprietary, as well as kind of a user pooled selective sharing mechanism in between. And the documents that are focused, you know, can be very focused on just individual types of data, genetics or ag markets, as well as cross-cutting platforms like our own. So lots of attention to privacy, security, interoperability. That's, you know, that is just important with a lot of these platforms' goals. But I will kind of emphasize this last point, that it's important, the more of these platforms that proliferate, that we're going to need standards and APIs that will aid the sharing among the platforms. Because, you know, having a whole bunch of platforms that don't talk to each other is not going to do anyone a whole lot of good. So I want to just acknowledge a few folks in order to get some information. I did contact a few folks, so I appreciate the inputs of Cynthia Parr and her colleague Ming Chan, as well as Aaron Alt for aptly pointing out that to me that OADA was not a platform, but it has a lot of really cool and useful utilities, as we just heard about. So I will stop there and open it for questions.
Thank you.
Questions,
David,
anyone?
Sorry, what was that?
I was just inviting people to send in some questions.
While you're waiting for that, I just want to make a comment. Earlier it was mentioned that GEMS was an infomediary, meaning that all of the data comes in and we make decisions. We do not make any decisions, by the way, on people's data. Everybody owns their own data. We are completely not even involved in the sharing of data unless they explicitly share it with us. So I just want to clarify that was not quite a correct statement that was said earlier today.
what was the process that I guess the legislation that took GEMS out of the FOIA requests, was that specifically for GEMS, or was that like a?
Yes. So there was basically our dean and Phil Pardey lobbied with the legislature to put in basically an amendment to the Data Practices Act that explicitly states, it says that the agroinformatics platform at the University of Minnesota, any data deposited that is deemed private, non-public, period. So it is this platform.
And how do you know how hard that was to move forward?
Phil can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that literally took them about a year or two, but it unanimously passed in both houses, the Senate and the House. So there was a lot of support, and surprisingly, really this was great.
Do we have any questions, David?
Here's one. What are the downsides of the proliferation platforms for ag purposes? Has this contributed to confusion in any way? And if so, where is the confusion?
So I think, yes, there are downsides to having more and more platforms, but there's also upsides too. So the downsides, you're correct, confusion, potential for lack of standards and consistency from platform to platform. I'd say that I need to stress the upsides though. The upsides is no one shop can handle it all. And there are certain areas and data domains that no one group is ever going to do well. But for groups to talk, create platforms to talk to each other and to start creating standards through API standards that we can exchange information back and forth, that's going to be your best route actually to do it.
And that the comparison of platforms, do you have that information publicly available, or is that a future paper?
That's the future paper here in Agronomy Journal. We'd have our extended abstract. This was the impetus for us to actually start comparing various platforms. There's a little bit more legwork that needs to be done to make sure. I want to actually follow up with contacting each of those authors. I've only done it to 2 of them at the moment, to actually make sure that what I interpret from their literature, that I've interpreted correctly, because it's hard to know what, especially security, what they're doing behind the scenes. Some of them boldly show what they're doing, others keep it concealed, or they just can't find it. So that's why I need to follow up before I actually put that in published printing. I want to make sure it's correct.
Okay, and with Phil Pardey involved, could you please explain how to link economics with productivity to evaluate profitability of new digital ag tools, specifically for GEMS here?
Yeah, that would be a great one for Phil.
Okay, let's move on to it.
Just briefly, I mean, it is a very good question, David. And you know, there is a large literature, a bit to which I and colleagues have contributed to disentangle the economics of technical change and productivity improvements in agriculture. And I think the part of the motivation behind Mark's talk this morning was to start diving into the economics literature and extend that existing understanding and practice. And there's, you know, in another life, I do work on evaluating the returns to R&D, which is the same sort of part of the same question you asked. And in InSTePP, another center I run, we have thousands of rate of return evidence, hundreds of studies evaluating the impacts of technical change. None that I can recall related to any digital technologies, partly because they're so new, but there's also conceptual problems, and that's what Mark was trying to get at, as to how an economist go about thinking about evaluating the private and the social value and the distribution of that value amongst the different players and the consumers and producers in that market. So I think it's a rapidly emerging field in the economics of evaluation of technologies.
Good, thank you. Are there other communities, or what other communities are most analogous to the growth that we've seen in the ag platform development?
I would say in health sciences, there's been a large proliferation as well. I mean, it's you know, also in life sciences in this case, but there you got health. There have been a lot of things, as well as the issue of privacy. They have the same issues in that sense. So they've settled upon something that's agreed by many institutions called Beacon, which allows them to, it's sort of separating again. I've got a clinical study that has 600 individuals, these with this disease and this many with that disease, but not actually revealing the actual patients until you actually get together and then get the IRBs approved, and then you can actually, you know, proceed with that. So there are definitely analogies out there.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin.